Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to discuss something funny I noticed in the episode Unification Part 2 in Season 5 of TNG. In the plot of that episode, the Romulans have an elaborate scheme to try to invade the Vulcan with a kind of sneak attack. They basically acquire the 3 Vulcan ships, and they use a fake hologram of Spock to try to convince the Vulcans that this is a mission of peace, that they should let those 3 ships arrive at Vulcan, and I guess to allow them to beam down to Vulcan from the ships. But the ships actually carry a Romulan invasion force, and the plan is thwarted before it can begin. And in the end of that episode, a Romulan warbird decloaks next to those 3 ships and destroys them. And then LaForge commented that there were over 2,000 Romulan troops on those ships. And it is said that the Romulans destroyed their own invasion force so that it won't be taken prisoner by the Federation. So the problem with all of this is the number they gave. They said specifically that those ships carried only 2,000 soldiers. So that seems a little bit ridiculous if they're actually planning to conquer Vulcan. And Vulcan is supposedly one of the founding members of the Federation, so you would think it has a very large population. The number of Vulcans was never specified, so we can assume it's not a big population, but in the Kelvin timeline I think they did say their population was in the billions. And in any case, even if they have only 1 billion population, that still would be ludicrous to say that 2,000 soldiers are supposed to conquer the whole planet. It seems like a little bit of a stretch, but I think we can explain it away by saying that this attack force was obviously not the only force that was going to attack Vulcan. Obviously there were a lot of other cloaked Romulan ships which were also going to take part in the invasion, but because Vulcan probably has a lot of strong planetary defenses, they probably only needed that small task force as the opening move, maybe to take control of the government buildings or important key installations, maybe to take down the planetary defenses in order to allow the rest of their fleet to attack. So this whole scheme was basically like a Trojan horse. They wanted the Vulcans to open the gates and to allow these 3 ships to approach Vulcan, maybe to allow them to beam down supposed delegates into government buildings. And Vulcan probably has a lot of strong planetary defenses, probably a lot of shields, a lot of buildings are shielded that you cannot beam into those buildings. But if the Vulcans think those are peace delegates which are arriving, they might lower the shields of specific buildings, and then they'll be able to take the Vulcans by surprise, because instead of peace delegates, it will be heavily armed Romulan commando units who will get a foothold inside the important government buildings, and they'll be able to take some of the government as hostages and maybe gain access to some of the planetary defenses and turn off the shields in more installations. And then the rest of their invasion fleet will decloak, and then they will begin beaming down millions of soldiers to take control of the entire planet. But to make it all possible, those initial commando units will have to turn off all the defenses to make this invasion successful. And because they will probably be beaming down into all kinds of government buildings, they'll probably take hostage a lot of government officials. Maybe the entire Vulcan government will basically be secured right away, which is a very important point, to prevent the rest of Vulcan from resisting. Basically, if the Vulcans resist, they'll be able to immediately start executing all the leadership of the Vulcans. So this would be a very important card to try to pacify the Vulcans right away. And the Romulan fleet will take stations around the planet Vulcan and prevent the Federation from trying to liberate Vulcan. And with all the government officials in their hands, they'll be able to use them as hostages. They'll be able to scare the rest of the Federation from not intervening. And maybe they'll be able to force the Vulcan leaders to sign an agreement with them to so-called reunify the planet, to basically make this whole invasion legal, to supposedly give their permission. And the Romulans probably hope that this way it will not start a full-scale war between the Federation and the Romulan Empire. And the key to make this all possible is to take the Vulcan leadership as hostages in the very first stage of this invasion. And that's why it was so critical for them to fool the Vulcans into letting those 3 ships beam down people into supposedly government buildings, which otherwise they will not allow anyone to beam down. Probably they do have planetary defenses, just like Earth had the planetary defenses, and we can point to the Deep Space Nine episode Homefront, in which the entire planetary defenses got shut down by a small group of people, and then Admiral Layton said that without those defenses, Earth is defenseless. So I guess those defenses include some kind of planetary shield which prevents people from beaming down to the planet, or at least into certain installations on the planet, and also probably an ability to destroy enemy ships in orbit. And he clearly says that without those planetary defenses, Earth is completely defenseless. So the same is probably true on Vulcan. They probably do have very strong planetary defenses, but if the Romulans manage to shut down all those defenses in the very first move, then they'll be able to invade the planet and it will be basically defenseless against their invasion fleet. And so that's why it was so important for them for this scheme to work as a Trojan horse. So even though it's only 2,000 troops, probably those are the top level commando units, which are highly trained and highly equipped, and they should be able to take control of those important government installations, take hostages the Vulcan leadership, and turn off the planetary defenses so that the rest of the Romulan fleet will invade. We don't know how many Romulan ships probably were on their way. I would speculate at least a few hundred ships, maybe thousands. So without those diplomatic ships, they probably wouldn't be able to invade the planet because all the most important government and military installations are probably heavily shielded and it's impossible to beam down there. Maybe they could invade anyway, but then that would mean a lot of losses for them. It would also mean all the government officials will go into hiding, and then they won't be able to use them as hostages to prevent the rest of the Federation from retaliating. So that's why this was so important, and without it, the Romulans basically cancelled their entire invasion plan and destroyed their commando units because they were all on small ships which could not go at high warp, and so that means they couldn't escape Starfleet, and the Warbird couldn't beam them to their ship because the Enterprise was right there, and they would have to lower their shields to beam those soldiers into the Warbird, and then the Enterprise would be able to attack the Warbird. And so that's why the Romulans simply chose to destroy those small ships and then escape back into their territory. So this was a big embarrassment for the Romulans, and then they never tried that again. And maybe the Romulans picked this specific time to invade because they thought Starfleet was still weak after the Borg attack, and that is something I discussed in my previous video, trying to explain why Starfleet was so crippled after the loss of only 40 ships at Wolf 359. I made a whole video about that, and I explained that the biggest blow the Borg gave them was not destroying the 40 ships. The biggest blow was the fact that they destroyed a lot of the automatic defenses that the Federation had in the core of the Federation. And since the Borg were going roughly from the direction of the Romulan Empire, because the Delta Quadrant is kind of in the same direction as the Romulans are to the Federation, so I assume that a lot of the defenses that they took out were the same defenses that were designed to stop the Romulans. And so maybe that's why the Romulans wanted to exploit the fact that the Federation didn't rebuild all those defenses yet in order to invade Vulcan while it was still possible. I also theorized that until the Borg attack, the Federation didn't actually keep a lot of starships defending the core of the Federation. They probably relied heavily on automatic defenses, and they sent the majority of Starfleet on exploratory missions into deep space, and that's why they didn't have a lot of starships defending the core of the Federation, and they relied so heavily on those automatic defenses, but a lot of them got destroyed by the Borg. We saw a little bit of that. And so the loss of life was not that big, but they did lose a lot of infrastructure that was designed to stop invasions by hostile forces, and so that's why Starfleet was so eager to avoid conflicts in all of season 4 and 5 and even beyond that. I think Picard was always given orders to resolve the matter diplomatically because the Federation is not ready at this time for any sustained conflict. So I'm guessing they recalled a lot of their distant starships, but it would take time for all of them to return, and so the Federation was vulnerable at this time, and that's why the Romulans decided to exploit this opportunity to invade. It also explains why they never tried that again later, probably because Starfleet boosted up all their defenses and recalled a lot of starships and probably built a lot more ships than before, and that's why by the time of Deep Space Nine we see that Starfleet suddenly has a lot more ships than we ever saw in TNG. So that was just a quick summary. If you want to listen my complete analysis about that topic, check out my previous video. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.